Let's look at the role that interest groups play in our political system. What an interest group is simply an organization of people who share a common goal or interest, and they seek to influence the making of public policy. Basically what that means is that we have a group of people who share a similar belief. And what they want is laws to promote that belief, or at least at the very least, that no law will hurt that belief. Let's look at the NRA. The NRA, the National Rifle Association, is a good example of an interest group. The NRA's interest is gun rights and gun ownership. So anytime there's a piece of legislation out there that would limit gun rights, make it harder for gun owners to get guns, things like that, that the NRA is going to get involved. They're going to try to convince the members of Congress not to pass that particular piece of legislation. Here's a list of all the interest groups out there, actually by sector. So it'll break this down by sector here. These are just an alphabetical list by industry. So abortion rights or abortion pro-choice, banking, auto dealers, all of these are interest group sectors. Now, they're not actually the interest group. So let's go under one of these sectors. Let's go under, well, since we were talking about the NRA, let's go under gun rights. And under gun rights, we see that the NRA is an interest group here, but we also have the Safari Club and the Gun Owners of America and so on. So there are a number of different interest groups, and they share that same interest. They want to protect gun rights, gun ownership. Now, sometimes an interest group will hire a lobbyist. And a lobbyist is just somebody who works to try to influence legislation on behalf of that special interest. So the NRA, if they hire someone to work with Congress or try to convince members of Congress to vote a particular way on a piece of legislation, that would be a lobbyist. They don't have to be paid lobbyists. People can lobby government without being paid. But lots of times we have paid lobbyists who work for organizations, work for interest groups on behalf of that interest group. Let's do an example here. Let's say that there are 9 members of the Brandon Valley School Board. We'll just say these are the 9. And let's say that we have a superintendent. And let's say in order for any piece of legislation or any new rule to be made, that a majority of the school board must approve it and the superintendent must sign it. Very similar to, like, in order for a bill to become a law, it has to pass through a majority of Congress, and then the President of the United States must sign it. So let's say that the school board is considering making a policy that would allow Brandon Valley School District, the Brandon Valley High School students to have open lunch. Who would this affect? What kind of interest groups would want to get involved with this? Well, if this piece of legislation was going to be passed, there's a number of groups that may feel like this would either help them or hurt them. Groups like the school lunch program, students, parents, gas stations and convenience stores, restaurants, law enforcement, the general public, teachers. And there's probably many more. But there's this one single piece of legislation would affect a lot of different groups. And those groups, will say they're interest groups, would try to either get this bill passed if they think it would help them, or work to get it shot down if they think it would hurt them. So why would each of these want to get involved? Well, the school lunch program. I could imagine that if people started to eat, if we had open lunch, people wouldn't eat as much school lunch, and it would probably hurt that program. We could break this down with all of these, but let's look at gas stations and convenience stores along with restaurants. Don't you think that this piece of legislation would benefit them? More people then would have open lunch. They could walk over to the gas station. They could go over to Pizza Ranch or to McDonald's or whatever. And this piece of legislation would definitely benefit gas stations and restaurants and so on. So they would be trying to get this piece of legislation passed. What about parents? It's hard to say. Maybe parents feel like they would rather their kids not be driving around at lunch. They would rather them be in the school. So they might actually work to get this piece of legislation passed. Law enforcement, going to affect them. They're probably going to need more people on staff patrolling the streets, for driving, to make sure that the kids aren't speeding or accidents or whatever. So all of these groups may have a reason why they like or dislike this particular piece of legislation. Think of these as being interest groups and them trying to convince members of the school board not to pass it or that they should pass it. Sometimes they're also looking to make changes into that piece of legislation. Okay? And, who would lobby in favor of this particular change, this addition to? Well, let's say that one group is saying, hey, let's get this so you can only walk, that you can't drive during open lunch. Who would be benefit from this? Well, maybe law enforcement, because there'd be less traffic accidents and stuff to deal with. But most likely, the restaurants that are close to the school would benefit the most. Pizza Ranch might lobby to try to get this added to the bill. Dairy Queen, and so on. But places like McDonald's, this would hurt them. People can't walk all the way out to McDonald's and back in a half hour. So this addition to that law would help some interest groups, but it would hurt others. Let's skip that one. But the length of the lunch hour. Sioux Falls restaurants may say, you know what, let's see if we can get an hour lunch rather than a half hour lunch. Because if they add the hour lunch, then maybe kids will go into Culver's rather than eat at Pizza Ranch or McDonald's. And that little change in here would definitely affect restaurants in Sioux Falls, restaurants that are farther away. So they may lobby to get this added to it. Remember, they're looking out for their best interest. So Pizza Ranch, looking out for its best interest, would probably want people just to walk to open lunch, not drive. And that's what interest groups do. They try to get government to work on their behalf. And there's nothing wrong with it. We all have the right to get government or try to convince government to work on our behalf. They're just more organized than a regular average citizen. Well, let's say this open lunch rule didn't pass. Now, remember we said there are 9 members of the school board? Well, let's say that these 4 voted in favor of it, but these 5 voted against, so it didn't get past them. Well, there's something else that maybe an interest group could do. Rather than trying to convince 1 or 2 of these over here to vote in favor of the bill, maybe they need to get people elected who already believe open lunch should happen. So what they could do differently is in the next election, they could try to get people elected who already support open lunch, especially if those people are running against any one of these down here. That's where PACs come. PACs stand for Political Action Committees, and they are essentially the political wing of an interest group. And PACs will take the money that the interest group gives them, and they will use that money to try to help get candidates elected who already share their particular view on issues. It makes it easier. If somebody's in Congress who already shares your view, you don't really have to work that hard to convince them that your view is right, that they should vote the way you would like them to. PACs give a lot of money to candidates who support their cause. And we also know that they are often ideological, meaning that conservative PACs will typically give money to Republican candidates because Republicans are more conservative. Liberal PACs will typically give money to Democratic candidates because Democrats are more liberal. So not only can we look at PACs, we can get some idea if that PAC has a conservative view or a liberal view just by looking at who they give money to. The more money and members that an interest group has usually equates to the more power and influence they have. The NRA is a powerful interest group because it has a lot of members. And because it has a lot of members, it has a lot of money. So it has money that it can give to candidates when they're running for office. It has money that they can use to try to convince people to put power or pressure on politicians. That's the role, at least a quick version of the role that interest groups play in our political system.